Welcome back to Power Play. As we've been discussing tonight, all of Canada's premiers are urging Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to take some immediate action and reform Canada's bail system. How likely is that to happen, and what might necessitate some changes? Let's bring in our front bench panel of former premiers to talk about that. Joining me this evening, former British Columbia Premier Christy Clark, former Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne, and former Nova Scotia Premier Darrell Dexter. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I appreciate you making the time.
Hi.
Christy, I wanted to start with you. And just on the, I feel like for many people across this country right now, crime has edged up in the last number of months. It's something we are talking about, our own safety, like just with the, especially with the amount of random attacks. I definitely feel like it's top of mind for a lot of Canadians. How worried would you be if you were leading a province like BC or Ontario, where we've seen a lot in Toronto lately, about what's happening, and do you understand the call for bail reform?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, okay, so the Vancouver numbers, about on average 4 people a day are victims of attacks by strangers. So there's no, nothing they've done is just random. And I don't think you can, run a country where people feel safe if that's what we know is happening out there. This is a product of years and years of courts making decisions where they're trying to do the right thing, but where there's very little connection to the way things actually work on the ground. So you see Crown prosecutors so overwhelmed and busy. You see them trying to meet timelines that have been set by the court, which turn out to be impossible. You see a court system that isn't keeping track of how many times someone's been back and what, back and forth to the courts. And so they don't even have any real record sometimes on the people that they are letting back out on the streets. So if the NDP in British Columbia is calling for bail reform, and they were last year amongst the first in the country, then it's a very serious issue for people.
Yeah, it seems, especially where the premiers are concerned, Darrell, to really cross party lines. Certainly all 13 of them, right, signed this letter to the Prime Minister. How complicated do you think that kind of reform will be? Or do you think it's something the feds could do fairly soon?
Well, I think, first of all, Canadians have a right to feel safe in their own community. They shouldn't have to worry about violence, particularly, as Christy has mentioned, those kind of random acts which seem to be on the rise for no apparent reason. This is something that obviously falls directly in the lap of the federal government, and I think that the issue that they need to address very squarely is the one that I think was underlined by the chiefs of police, which is that group of I think they call them repeat and prolific violent offenders. I think that is something that the government could address. And of course, there are other pieces that I think Christy was already alluding to, which include things like, post-release supervision and proper funding for those kinds of services, which are every bit as important as the legislation itself.
Kathleen, a lot of this seems to come up not against, but in opposition to some of the stuff that happened with Bill C-75, right? So the intent there was to help clear, crowded prisons, and also help with the disproportionate number of minorities who are in those prisons. But what ended up happening, it seems, is something to the detriment of society more largely. And I'm wondering how complicated you think that makes it for the government.
Well, I think it's a really complicated process, Vassy. I mean, everything that Christy and Darrell has said is part of the issue, but I think that the precipitating incidents have been very recent, and I think we have to be careful as a country that we don't just react to really hard cases. That there be a good examination of what works and what doesn't work. So I think that there are things that have been tried, and Christy would know more about this than me, but some of the programs that have been piloted in BC, where some of those prolific offenders that Darrell's talking about have actually not just been put in jail, but actually have treatment and social service support around them. And there seems to be some success in terms of lack of recidivism. I don't think there's a simple solution. I think that things like I think some of the premiers are saying we should have judges rather than justices of the peace, for example, in Ontario, make these decisions. Well, there was a pilot done in Ontario. We need to see the evidence from that. We need to see if that actually worked. It was started under our government, and we haven't heard from the current government whether it worked or not. So I totally understand why the premiers are calling for some change. The bill, as you said, went in one direction, and there's always a course correction that has to happen, and that should be happening in consultation with the federal government, with the provinces, justice ministers, and with the premiers.
It's interesting because a lot of what you said, Kathleen, reminded me of a lot of the debate in the United States, right? Where some of the statistics don't necessarily bear out over a longer period of time the feeling that we have. But I'm wondering, Christy, from your perspective, if as politicians you're kind of, you're confronted with the reality that you have to deal with that feeling regardless, right? Like that you can still operate, of course, within the realm of facts. But if people are worried about what really seems like a higher incidence of strangers being attacked, or what happened to the OPP officer, you know what I mean? Like if the sense is I feel less safe, you kind of got to figure out a way to deal with it.
Yes, you do, because we know that if people feel less safe, I mean, this is not anecdotal evidence. This is based on multiple studies. If people feel less safe in their communities, the communities actually get less safe. Mm-hmm. We also know, though, the trend is obvious. This is not, just some blip. Our streets are less safe. You look at anti-Asian attacks that are happening all across the country. You look at as I talked about, the attacks on from strangers, 4 people a day on average in Vancouver. I mean, it's getting worse, and the system that we've set up to deal with it is not making it easier. What we've ended up with is kind of a catch and release process. And I think most people would say, look, it's terrible that people who are vulnerable or from difficult circumstances are more likely to find their ways into the jail system. But the way to deal with that is to not make people less safe by putting that small percentage of them who are extremely dangerous back out on the street because we haven't figured out what to do with them.
But Vassy, the thing that's worse in terms of the politics of this is if we make changes that then don't work. So the point I'm making is that we have to make sure that there's some evidence for the changes that we as a country suggest, because if people feel unsafe and then government says, well, we're going to do this change, and that's motivated by politics because you have to be seen to be doing something. And then if people still don't feel safe, then that's worse, because that then undermines people's faith in the ability of government to do anything. And, the right to bail it's a charter protected right. And so, and our system is based in an assumption of innocence until proven guilty. So we have to recognize those parameters and then look at the evidence and do the things that are going to work. Because the last thing we need to do is undermine people's faith in government's ability to actually make a change that's going to be, in fact, better.
I think part of what's being suggested is, for example, a reverse onus on certain types of offenders. But like you said, we'll have to wait and see what the evidence is.
And right? That already exists.
Yes, in certain instances.
And so maybe it needs to be redefined.
I get it for sure. And I appreciate that. I think Mr. Dexter, I think Daryl froze for a second. So I'm going to actually switch gears, if you don't mind, with Christy and Kathleen, because we have a few minutes left. And I did want to get into a little bit of a political discussion because there's some new polling out that's quite interesting. I want to bring it up on the screen. I believe we have it. Abacus polling that shows the Conservatives with a wider lead than prior, 8-point lead ahead of the Liberals. And the chair and CEO of that polling firm, David Kapelos, says that the numbers show the Liberals are losing the empathy game and that they need to focus on pocketbook issues and the healthcare crisis. And then we've also got New Nanos polling that shows the Conservatives have a 3-point lead over the Liberals. Last week, it was a little bit wider. Christy, what would you read into those numbers if you were, walking the hallways of federal parties right now?
I wouldn't make a lot of the top line numbers, Vassy. I mean, I went into an election 20 points behind and I won the election. So, and that, not that far before. So I don't make a lot, but I do think there's something to see underneath that. And what we see is that we see Justin Trudeau's personal numbers. He's dragging his party down. We see the NDP are starting to lose a lot of steam as well. And we see that, Mr. Poilievre his party's doing better, but he's still not very popular. So here's my prediction based on what we kind of see in those underlying numbers. I think we're going to see a very polarized election. I think you are going to see Justin Trudeau vilifying Pierre Poilievre, and the opposite will be true. But I think that the Liberals are going to get a real bump out of the fact that the NDP are just nowhere. So it'll be a two-party election. And if Mr. Poilievre hopes to win, he should hope that Justin Trudeau waits to call it so that the election is more on economic issues and he has time to develop some optimism in the things that he talks about rather than seeming so negative most of the time. And Trudeau should call it fast before the economy tanks. People start to recognize how badly he's managed the economy over the years. And they may not like Mr. Poilievre at the end of the day, but I think if the economy's bad enough, people will certainly put their vote behind him.
Poor Daryl can't respond to the NDP because his connection timed out. So Kathleen, I'll give you the last word. Just on the question of looking at those numbers and making a calculation about when to call an election, what would you be advising the Prime Minister to do?
Well, I think the Liberals have a lot of work to do, and I think they have to demonstrate that that they're on the case. There's the governing. They are governing, and they have a lot of issues in front of them. The healthcare accord is really important. So those meetings and those bilateral agreements are going to be very, very important. As Christy said, the economy is critical. So I think they've got a lot of work to do. So if I were walking the halls, I'd be talking to the ministers and making sure they're on the case. But the Liberal Party, I think you're going to see going after Poilievre's brand. I think that the leader of the Conservatives has to demonstrate that he has the humanity to be the Prime Minister. I mean, Christy talked about it as negativity. I think it goes beyond negativity, but he's got to demonstrate that he's got what it takes for people to actually vote for him, because he's running behind his party as well. I think you're going to see, I'm not going to predict when the election is going to be, but I think you're going to see the beginnings of a heightened campaign in terms of maybe some ads will start to be run, and we'll start to see the debate taking shape.
Daryl, your connection is, I think, back, but it's very shaky. And I just have 30 seconds left. A quick final question to you, if you hear me. If you were Justin Trudeau, would you call the election sooner rather than later?
Oh, no, I think they need time to do some level setting on a whole number of issues. The right track, wrong track numbers are not good. All the affordability numbers are really in the tank. So they need to show that they're addressing those. I think for the Conservatives, what they need to do, of course, is to never admit that they are in the lead. The best frontrunner campaign is to say that you're never. So they need to do some work defining their leadership. But I think the majority of the work now is with the government.
Okay, I've got to leave it there. I'm out of time. Thank you very much, all three of you, for your time tonight. Christy Clark, Kathleen Wynne, and Daryl Dexter. We're back with today's takeaway in just a moment.